The Vietnam War was a civil war fought between Communist North Vietnam and South Vietnam. America's involvement in the conflict was very controversial because many Americans did not feel the need to risk the lives of their own citizens to interfere with problems in the Far East. This war drafted many men into the military. James Staton was one of those men. Born in Lexington, Kentucky, Mr. Staton was drafted into service March 24, 1968. He served in the Army. When I asked what the hardest part of basic training was, he said it was conditioning your mind to take orders from people you didn't know, and also the combat training. He was deployed to Vietnam from August 13, 1968 to January 25, 1969. He served in combat and his job was point man. A point man is the person most exposed in a combat zone. In a time where there was no cell phones or email, it was extremely difficult for soldiers to be separated from their families. Mr. Staton said they wrote letters to their friends and family, and once when he was in Japan, he was allowed to call his parents. This photo was taken in Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam, on the South China Sea, where Mr. Staton was in the hospital for a time. I asked Mr. Staton about friendships he made during the war. He responded, "We had friends, but we didn't get really close because they were alive today and dead the next. Later in service, back in the States, we had many friends and tried to keep up with them." This picture is from the Vietnam Wall of Names in Washington, D.C. The name of his friend, Charles Bogart, who died right beside him in combat. Mr. Staton said that their humor was seen by some to be cold and hard, but it was funny at the time. He said, "We were combat soldiers who were living in the jungle trying not to be killed. We laughed about not getting hit and how close a bullet came to you." After his service ended, he came back home. He said this about the transition back to the United States. This part of my life was hard because we were treated differently when we came home. We were warriors one day, and the next we were civilians in a world that didn't understand what we went through. We were trained to kill and handle life-altering events. Our patience ran thin when we were confronted with problems with people and the world. With God's help, I changed after January 11th, 1975, when the Lord saved me by His grace. Mr. Staton was awarded many medals during and after his time in Vietnam, including 2 Purple Hearts, National Defense Service Medal, and the Combat Infantry Badge. He was featured in the Lexington Herald Leader for his service to our country. Mr. Staton's message to all children and people who hear this interview is freedom is not free. There will be sacrifices made for your freedom, so never forget the heroes that have died so you can have peace. This is Mr. Staton and his wife. And he wanted to leave us with this verse, Proverbs 3:5-6. "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not on thy own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths."